It started on a quiet Tuesday morning, the kind where nothing seems out of place. Birds chirping, mail being dropped off, lawn sprinklers hissing faintly in the background. But behind one pair of drawn curtains on a street lined with shiny cars and manicured hedges, something was brewing that would flip this calm little neighborhood upside down. You ever hear about one of those stories where the person with all the money thinks they're untouchable until they cross someone who knows something they don't? Well, that's exactly where this story is headed. And trust me, you're going to want to stay with me until the very last second, because what happens in the final minutes changes everything. It's not just about karma, it's about power, truth, and the quiet kind of justice that hits when no one sees it coming. Let's talk about Greg Langston. 63 years old, retired tech executive, lives in a 3-story mansion at the end of Briarwood Lane. The kind of guy who doesn't just have a Tesla, he has 2 of them, in different colors. He wears luxury like it's part of his skin. Greg's the kind of man who doesn't wave at the mailman, doesn't make eye contact at the HOA meetings, and sure as hell doesn't care about what happens to the people living just a few feet beyond his wrought iron gate. To most people, he's the definition of success. Polished, confident, loaded. But if you talk to the neighbors, and not the ones on his Christmas card list, you'll hear another version. You'll hear about the woman next door, Sarah, who used to bring him banana bread when he first moved in. You'll hear how Greg never thanked her, never said a word. And when her roof started caving in last winter and she asked, just once, for a little help with repairs, he didn't even open the door. Now I know what you're probably thinking. Okay, so a rich guy's a jerk to his struggling neighbor. Sadly, that's not rare. But this isn't just a story about someone being heartless. No, this is about a man who thought he was above consequences until he learned that Sarah wasn't as powerless as he thought. Because the thing Greg didn't know is this: Sarah has a brother. And her brother isn't just anybody. He's a high-stakes lawyer from DC, with a reputation for dismantling men exactly like Greg. And when he hears what happened to his sister, let's just say things go from cold silence to scorched earth in record time. Before we go deeper, I want to talk directly to you for just a second. If you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or written off by someone who thought their money gave them more worth than your dignity, then this story is for you. I want you to stay with me, because every twist and turn ahead is going to hit harder than the last. And yes, I know videos make promises all the time. This will blow your mind. Wait until you see the ending. But here, I'm not teasing. I'm telling you right now, you'll get the answer to why this story matters, and why the final few seconds hit like a freight train. So don't click away, don't pause it for later, because the moment you step away, you'll miss the very thing that makes it unforgettable. Back to the neighborhood. Back to Sarah. She's in her late 30s, works full-time at the local elementary school as a reading specialist. Single mother of 2. Every morning, she's up at 5:30, packing lunches, making coffee, combing little curls, and tying sneakers before the school bell rings. Her life isn't easy, but she never complains. She waves at everyone, knows which kids on the block need extra snacks when their parents can't afford them, and has this natural warmth that makes people feel like they've known her forever. So when her roof started leaking and mold began to creep along her bathroom ceiling, it wasn't pride that led her to knock on Greg's door. It was desperation. She knew he had extra materials left over from his own home renovation, and a few workers still on site finishing up some deck work. All she needed was a loan of supplies. Not money. Not charity. Just a chance to fix things before her children got sick. Greg opened the door just enough to look at her, not enough to let the heat out. And then, with the kind of tone only the ultra-entitled seemed to master, he told her she should have planned better. That it wasn't his responsibility. That people need to stop depending on others. Then he shut the door. Not a single word of kindness. Not even a sorry. And that might have been the end of it. Except her youngest got sick the very next week. Hospital visits, inhalers, school absences. And when Sarah had to take unpaid leave to manage the chaos, her car was repossessed. The spiral was fast and brutal. And the man with the perfect lawn didn't even blink. Now, here's where the story starts to crack wide open. Sarah never told Greg who her brother was. And when she finally picked up the phone and told him everything, Greg's refusal, the hospital bills, the roof, the silence. It was like lighting a fuse on a bomb no one saw coming. Her brother, Marcus, hadn't been back in town in almost 6 years. But the next morning, he was on the first flight in from D.C., not as a brother, but as legal counsel. And Greg? He had no idea what kind of storm was already at his door. Let's take a quick pause and set the atmosphere here, because this isn't just about one bad neighbor. This is about the broader question a lot of us are asking right now. What happens when power gets too comfortable? When wealth blinds people to the humanity of the people around them? Stories like this are going viral all over YouTube. Titles like "Entitled Landlord Gets a Wake-Up Call," "Karen Tries to Sue Teenager, Learns He's a Hacker," "Man Yells at Cashier, Then Her Dad Walks In."
Why?
Because people are fed up. They're tired of watching the powerful walk away without consequences. And what happens in this story? It flips the script in a way that's incredibly satisfying. Because Marcus didn't come back looking for a fight. He came back with a plan.
Quiet.
Calculated. Legal. But, oh, was it devastating. In just a few weeks, paperwork started arriving at Greg's door. Subpoenas, property audits, noise complaints, zoning violations tied to his deck renovation. Turns out, that very deck he was so proud of? Built in a zoning-restricted area. And the contractors? Unlicensed. Oh, and Greg had been renting out his guest house as an Airbnb under a fake name, technically a code violation for single-family zoning. Every single thread Marcus pulled started unraveling the image Greg had spent years polishing. And the best part? Greg still didn't know who was behind it. But what really raises the stakes, what really makes this story explode, is what Marcus finds next. A sealed legal file from 12 years ago, buried in county court records. A detail Greg thought no one would ever find. A deal he made. A decision that, if exposed, could cost him everything, including his freedom. I won't spoil what's in it yet, but I will tell you this. When Sarah learns what Greg did all those years ago, the whole story shifts from petty conflict to something much, much darker. And right now you're probably asking, what did Greg do? What was he hiding? And how does Sarah's lawyer brother plan to use it? All good questions. But I'm going to ask you to hold that thought for just a moment longer, because the next part of this story isn't just about Greg or Marcus or Sarah. It's about you. It's about what we allow, what we excuse, and what we choose to confront. We've all had a Greg in our lives. Someone who had the means to help but chose not to. Someone who thought they could walk away without looking back. But not this time. So don't even think about clicking away, because what happens next? It's the kind of twist that will have you texting your friends saying, "You won't believe what just happened." The game's about to change. The truth's about to come out. And Greg Langston? He's about to learn the hard way what happens when you treat good people like they don't matter. Because Sarah's lawyer knows something he doesn't. And once it's revealed, nothing will ever be the same. The truth is, Greg Langston hadn't always been this cold. There was a time, years ago, when neighbors remembered him smiling more, when his laugh could be heard during backyard barbecues and summer parties that used to spill out onto the lawn under twinkling patio lights. He moved to Briarwood Lane about 10 years ago, just after cashing out of a major tech startup in Silicon Valley. No one knew the full details, but the sale had made national headlines.
Stocks.
Patents. A quick rise, and even quicker exit. People assumed he was just a savvy businessman who got out at the top, a man who outsmarted the system. But behind closed doors, there were whispers that he hadn't left entirely by choice. That something happened behind that golden handshake, a lawsuit that disappeared too quietly, a non-disclosure agreement that silenced more than just numbers. Sarah didn't care about any of that when he first moved in. To her, he was just the new guy next door, who looked like he could use a warm welcome and maybe a fresh loaf of banana bread. But even back then, Greg kept his distance, offering only polite nods and half-hearted smiles. And yet, neighbors swore they caught him watching people from his upstairs window, like he was always waiting for something or someone to show up unannounced. In the months leading up to their confrontation, Greg had become even more reclusive. Delivery drivers noticed he'd started getting packages at odd hours, boxes labeled with obscure international labels, some arriving from Switzerland, others from Singapore. No one knew what was inside. The gate cameras always picked up the same thing: the trucks pulling in, Greg signing with a leather glove on his hand, and the boxes vanishing behind his front door. He no longer attended community meetings, skipped HOA dues without a word, and even fired his landscapers without explanation. The lawn, once pristine, began growing uneven patches. Something had shifted, and while most people chalked it up to an aging millionaire growing bitter and paranoid, Sarah's brother Marcus saw the signs differently. He'd seen that pattern before in his cases: isolation, secrecy, behavior that signaled not just arrogance, but fear. As Marcus began piecing together Greg's financial and legal history, more questions emerged than answers. For instance, Greg's home wasn't listed under his name. It had been quietly transferred 2 years earlier into a blind trust based in the Cayman Islands. A common move for someone trying to avoid taxes or lawsuits, but combined with the sudden decline in Greg's public presence, it raised flags. More importantly, Marcus noticed something that even Greg's neighbors had missed. A shell company tied to the trust had been funneling payments to an unknown entity listed only as LS Holdings. The money trail was carefully hidden, like someone went to great lengths to bury it, but not carefully enough. And when Marcus tracked down the bank that had processed the transfers, one name jumped out of the documents: Evan Mercer. That was a name Marcus hadn't heard in years, but once he did, everything began to feel more personal. Evan had once been Greg's business partner back in California. He'd vanished from the public eye just weeks before Greg sold his shares in the startup. Some claimed Evan had a breakdown. Others whispered that he'd been pushed out, maybe even paid off. But there had never been any proof. Now here he was again, buried in a list of financial transactions Greg was trying to hide. And the more Marcus dug, the more bizarre the connections became. Late-night wire transfers, stock purchases under aliases, legal filings from old courtrooms that had since been sealed. It was like chasing shadows. But something about Evan Mercer's sudden reappearance, and the fact that Greg seemed so desperate to keep him hidden, felt like the key to unlocking the entire mystery. At the same time, Sarah began noticing strange things around her home. Her mail arrived torn open more than once. Her garbage cans were searched. Nothing was taken, but she could tell someone had been through them. One night, she found her back gate swinging open, even though she always locked it before bed. The local police chalked it up to teenagers, maybe raccoons. But it didn't sit right. Especially not after she noticed a black SUV parked at the end of her street 2 nights in a row, engine off, windows too dark to see through. She mentioned it to Marcus, who immediately tightened her home's Wi-Fi security and installed a camera above her front door. Whatever Greg was hiding, Marcus was certain someone didn't want it found. And the closer they got, the more Sarah's quiet little world felt like it was being watched. But here's where things really started to twist. One afternoon, while reviewing zoning board complaints against Greg's property, Marcus came across a name he didn't expect to see: James Wilder. On paper, Wilder was just a city inspector who'd recently flagged Greg's deck renovation for safety violations. But Marcus recognized the name from a high-profile real estate fraud case 3 years earlier, a case Marcus had personally helped investigate. Wilder had been on the city's payroll but was secretly taking kickbacks from developers to overlook illegal builds. He was caught, charged but never sentenced. The case was dropped without explanation. And now, here he was again, showing up in a small town 2 states over, writing up Greg Langston's property. It didn't make sense, unless someone wanted to keep an eye on Greg under the radar. This opened another door. Marcus began to suspect that Greg wasn't just protecting himself. He might have been protecting others. Or being controlled. It was no longer just a story about one rich man's selfishness. There were too many moving parts. Too many names that didn't belong in a simple neighborhood dispute. Every time Marcus thought he had a handle on it, another layer peeled back, revealing something more complicated. More dangerous. And now, the question wasn't just what Greg was hiding, it was who else knew about it, and what they were willing to do to keep it buried. And yet, for all the legal clues, the documents, the financial oddities, it was something small, something quiet that changed everything. One morning, Sarah received a plain manila envelope slipped through her mail slot. No return address. No handwriting. Just a USB stick inside and one word written on the outside. Listen. She called Marcus immediately, and together they opened the files. What they heard wasn't what they expected. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't threats. It was a recording, Greg's voice, slightly muffled but unmistakable, speaking to someone on the phone. Talking about the project, about keeping him quiet, about how it wasn't supposed to end like this. The conversation was cut off halfway through. There was no date, no location. But one phrase stood out, and it was chilling. Greg said, "If that woman next door keeps pushing, we'll handle it the same way we handled Mercer." That was the first time Marcus saw real fear in Sarah's eyes. So now, here's where we're at. Greg Langston, the man who slammed his door on a struggling mother, might be connected to something far deeper and far more sinister than anyone imagined. Sarah, once just a quiet neighbor trying to raise her kids, is now at the center of a secret someone doesn't want uncovered. And Marcus, the lawyer who came back to help his sister, might be walking into a legal labyrinth with more danger than he ever expected. But here's the thing. You still don't know everything. Not yet. There's a reason that deck Greg built was inspected twice in 1 week. There's a reason Wilder showed up in this town, a reason Mercer vanished, and a reason that audio recording was sent anonymously to Sarah. And there's someone else, someone no one suspects, who's been pulling strings from the shadows the entire time. Someone who's been watching, waiting, and whose next move could turn this case on its head.
Stay with me.
Because just when you think you've figured it out, this story takes a turn you'll never see coming. Things started unraveling faster than anyone could have predicted. Just when Marcus thought he was finally getting close, just when the pieces started falling into place like a jigsaw puzzle forming the shape of a long-buried secret, everything shifted. It started with the drive. That USB stick with Greg's recorded conversation?
Gone.
Disappeared. One night it was locked in Marcus's safe in his home office. The next morning, the door was still locked. No signs of forced entry, but the safe was wide open. Nothing else was taken, just that one piece of evidence. It didn't make sense. No security footage, no fingerprints, no trace of how someone even got in. Sarah hadn't told anyone about the recording. Marcus had only mentioned it in passing during a call with a private investigator he trusted for years. That's when he started to feel the chill, when he realized someone was always one step ahead, always listening, always watching. The calm streets of Briarwood Lane suddenly felt like a trap, and whatever this was, it ran deeper than a greedy neighbor with skeletons in his closet. And that's when the warning came. It wasn't overt. No threats taped to the door or ominous phone calls in the middle of the night.
It was more subtle, more precise.
Marcus returned to his car after picking up Sarah's daughter from school one afternoon and found a plain white envelope sitting on the driver's seat. Inside, a single Polaroid photo. It was grainy, shot from a distance, but unmistakable. It was a picture of Sarah, standing outside her house, holding her daughter's hand. The timestamp printed across the bottom corner was from 2 days prior. Someone had been close enough to watch them, close enough to document them, and careful enough to leave no trail. No note, no signature. Just a message that was loud and clear without saying a word. Stop. Still, Marcus couldn't let it go. The deeper he dug, the more he uncovered pieces that didn't add up. Greg's blind trust wasn't just shielding real estate, it was tied to patents, old intellectual property agreements, and a biotech firm that had been quietly dissolved years ago after public scandal involving illegal drug trials. That firm? It had been co-founded by none other than Evan Mercer. And here's the kicker, Sarah's late husband, Daniel, had once worked for that same company. She hadn't known. He'd been a mid-level project coordinator, assigned to logistics, but when she found his old records in the attic, buried under boxes of baby clothes and broken picture frames, she realized there were meetings, emails, even a signed NDA from that same period Greg and Evan's company had started collapsing. It was a connection she never saw coming, and now, it changed everything. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that Daniel's death, once considered a tragic car accident, might not have been so accidental after all. He'd been traveling late at night on a stretch of road that rarely saw traffic. No witnesses. No cameras. The cause of the accident had always felt too neat, too convenient. Now, knowing his name was tied to the very company at the center of this web, she began to wonder if the crash had been a warning long before she ever knew there was something worth protecting. And suddenly, the fact that Greg had shut her out, that he denied help, wasn't just cruelty. It was strategy. He'd recognized her. He knew exactly who she was and who she'd once been married to. Marcus started looking closer at those around them. People he thought were allies, suddenly becoming quiet, avoiding eye contact, pulling away. That private investigator he trusted stopped answering calls. His office was cleared out in less than 48 hours, lease terminated, records scrubbed. It was like the man had never existed. Even Wilder, the crooked inspector, vanished after a routine inspection on a house 3 streets over. His city-issued car was found abandoned 2 counties away. No note. No signs of struggle. Just a silent disappearance that didn't make the news, like someone wanted to erase every loose end that could lead back to Greg. But perhaps the most jarring moment came when Marcus met with Monica Ray, an old college friend who'd become a legal analyst specializing in corporate whistleblower cases. She owed Marcus a favor. After he explained the tangled mess involving Greg, Evan, the shell companies, and the USB, she went pale. Her fingers stopped on the keyboard, and her voice dropped to a whisper. "You're not supposed to be this close," she said. This isn't about a neighbor dispute. It's not even about fraud. This is about people who disappear. People who get paid to stay quiet or punished when they don't." And then, just before, Monica never finished her sentence. She froze for a second, eyes darting to the window behind Marcus, then quickly closed her laptop and whispered, "Don't call me again," before grabbing her bag and walking out, leaving Marcus in stunned silence. The shift was so abrupt, so chilling, it felt like something had crawled into the room and sucked the air out of it. He sat there for several minutes, trying to make sense of what had just happened, when his phone buzzed, an unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. No one spoke. Just faint static, then the unmistakable sound of a child's laughter. His blood went cold. That laugh, it was his niece's. A recording from last weekend's family cookout. It had never been posted, never shared. Which meant someone had access to his personal files, someone watching, digging, just like he was. Back in Briarwood, Sarah tried to stay composed, but the pressure was mounting. Her daughter had started waking up at night, crying about a man at the window. At first, Sarah thought it was a nightmare, just lingering stress from everything going on. But when she checked the window one morning, she found a small smudge, like a partial fingerprint, barely visible in the early light. And behind the hedge in her backyard, buried under the wet leaves, she found something else. A burner phone. No contacts. No texts. Just one photo in the gallery, an old black and white image of a woman standing in front of a government building. Sarah didn't recognize her, but the woman looked familiar, somehow, like a face from a memory she hadn't fully recalled yet. She brought it to Marcus, who ran it through facial recognition software, and that's when the next twist hit. The woman was Evelyn Pierce, a whistleblower from nearly 20 years ago who'd vanished after exposing a pharmaceutical company's illegal testing on terminally ill patients. The company? A subsidiary of the same biotech firm Daniel had worked for. And suddenly the puzzle felt too big to be a coincidence. But just as quickly, another blow landed. Greg's attorney went on the offensive, slamming Sarah with a cease and desist order, accusing her of defamation, harassment, and potential criminal tampering. It was a legal ambush meant to box her in and shut her up. The neighborhood turned cold. Friends who had been sympathetic started avoiding eye contact at the mailbox. Neighbors whispered behind closed blinds, and even her daughter's school called to express concern over recent disruptions. It was clear someone was pulling strings, isolating her. That's when Marcus started questioning the one person he hadn't before, his own brother, James. James had been quiet about all of this from the start. Too quiet. While Marcus had been chasing leads, James had offered the usual supportive words but kept his distance, staying busy with work, never asking questions. But now Marcus remembered something odd. James had worked at a startup years ago, a data management firm that had been acquired by none other than the biotech company in question before the scandal broke. Marcus had dismissed it back then as unrelated, but now he wasn't so sure. When he confronted James, his brother's reaction was off. Not defensive, not angry, just nervous. As if he already knew what Marcus was going to ask. He denied everything, of course. Claimed he barely remembered the acquisition, said it was all routine, that he had nothing to do with the clinical research division. But there was something in his eyes, something brittle behind the calm smile that made Marcus walk away with more questions than answers. The deeper they dug, the less sense it all made. Old documents they'd retrieved now had redacted sections that hadn't been there before. A digital backup of Daniel's emails suddenly corrupted, overwritten by a system update no one initiated. A contact Sarah had reached out to, one of Daniel's old coworkers, was found dead in a motel outside Sacramento. The death ruled a suicide, despite the note left behind being typed and signed and lacking any fingerprints. It was starting to feel less like a mystery and more like a trap. And then came the most brutal blow yet. Sarah received a court summons. Someone had filed for custody of her daughter. An anonymous petition citing unfit home environment and potential psychological endangerment. The hearing was expedited, set for just 10 days out. It was a new front in the war, one designed to break her spirit. And just when Marcus thought things couldn't spiral further, he got an email. No subject, no sender. Just a single video attachment. It was grainy surveillance footage, time-stamped from 3 years ago, showing Daniel in a diner, meeting with none other than Evan Mercer. They were arguing. Daniel slammed his coffee down, stood up to leave, and Evan reached out to grab his arm, leaning in to say something just before the footage cut to black. That moment, one no one had known existed, rewrote everything they believed about Daniel's death. He hadn't been an unaware pawn.
He'd been involved.
He'd known Evan. And maybe, just maybe, he'd been trying to blow the whistle before someone stopped him. Now, the story Sarah thought she knew about her husband, her past, and her enemy was cracking wide open. But before Marcus could even start investigating that video, another message came through. Same anonymous source. This time it wasn't a file. It was a single sentence. You're digging in the wrong grave. Sarah hadn't slept in 2 days. The constant stream of new evidence, dead ends, and gut-wrenching clues had worn her down to something raw and frantic. Every shadow in her hallway looked like a figure. Every phone ring set her heart sprinting. She was watching her own reflection like a stranger, wondering when exactly she had started unraveling. It was no longer just about Daniel or some corporate scandal. This was personal, and whoever was behind it was now playing a different game. One meant to dismantle her completely. She was leaving the grocery store parking lot when it happened. A dark SUV pulled out from the row across the lot and began following her, slowly at first, like any other car. But when she switched lanes 3 times in under a mile and the vehicle mirrored every move, her stomach tightened. She tried to calm herself. It could have been nothing. Coincidence. Paranoia. But when she turned sharply into a gas station, parked near the front where cameras would see her, the SUV slowed to a stop on the side street. No tags, no parking, just idling. Watching. She didn't go inside. She just sat there, hands trembling on the steering wheel, pretending to scroll through her phone while stealing glances in the rearview mirror. After 5 minutes, the SUV finally rolled forward and disappeared around the corner. That was the first time she truly believed they were hunting her. Back home, the house no longer felt like a safe space. She locked the doors, pulled the curtains, and told her daughter to sleep in her room instead of her own. That night, Sarah sat in the hallway with a baseball bat, her laptop open next to her, watching the footage Marcus had sent, again and again, of Daniel and Evan Mercer. There were details she hadn't noticed before. Evan's coat was a military issue. His watch, a rare model issued to intelligence operatives. And on the table between them, briefly visible before Daniel stood up, was a black flash drive. Her eyes froze on it. She had seen one just like it in Daniel's toolbox a week before he died. She hadn't thought anything of it. Now it felt like a breadcrumb she'd missed entirely. Her mind reeled. Had he left her something? She sprinted to the garage in her slippers, rummaging through the mess that still carried the faint smell of oil and cedar. The toolbox was there, unlocked, but the flash drive was gone. In its place was a folded piece of paper, one she knew for certain hadn't been there before. It had only 2 words, written in all caps with a red Sharpie. "You're next." Something in her broke. She staggered back, her breath shallow, her chest tightening with a panic she couldn't contain. She grabbed her daughter, packed a bag, and drove to the edge of town, checking into a cheap roadside motel with stained carpets and flickering lights, because at least it didn't feel known. She didn't call Marcus. She didn't use her credit card. Everything had to be quiet now.
Stealthy.
But that night, as she lay awake in bed, her daughter curled beside her. A strange sound drifted from the hallway outside their room, a soft tapping, like metal against metal. It lasted less than a minute. When she opened the door to check, no one was there. But under the doorframe, placed neatly like a signature, was a torn photograph, one she recognized immediately. It was from her wedding. The original had been framed in her living room. Now it was ripped in half, and only Daniel's side remained. Marcus was unreachable. His phone went straight to voicemail. His email bounced back. And when she tried calling James to ask if he'd seen him, James sounded confused. He thought Marcus had flown to DC days ago. That wasn't possible. Marcus had just sent her the surveillance video 36 hours ago. Her heart sank. Had he disappeared too? Was she now alone in this? Every instinct screamed at her to run, but something held her back. The part of her that knew if she stopped now, Daniel's death would never be explained, her daughter would never be safe, and the people behind this would never face justice. The system was rigged. The evidence kept disappearing. Witnesses turned up dead. Threats were no longer subtle. But what terrified her the most wasn't the danger. It was the creeping, suffocating realization that maybe, just maybe, someone close to her wasn't who they claimed to be. Someone had access to her home, her belongings, even her memories. Someone who had been there all along, hiding in plain sight. The questions were multiplying. Why was the biotech company targeting her now, years after Daniel's death? What had he uncovered before his accident? What role did Evan Mercer really play? And why had the words "you're next" felt less like a warning and more like a prophecy?
She didn't know yet.
But deep down, she could feel it. The storm was just beginning. The knock at the motel door came just past midnight.
Soft.
Controlled. 3 short taps followed by silence. Sarah froze. Her daughter stirred beside her, but didn't wake. She hadn't told a soul where they were. No GPS, no credit card swipes, no calls. She approached the door slowly, heart pounding in her ears. Through the peephole, she saw a familiar face she hadn't expected to see again, let alone in the middle of nowhere. James. Her late husband's best friend. The man who had stood by her at the funeral. The man she had cried on when the police told her Daniel's crash was ruled accidental. But tonight, James didn't look like the same man. His face was gaunt, his eyes bloodshot, and his clothes were soaked from the rain, like he hadn't planned on stopping at all. Without saying a word, he stepped inside, closed the door behind him, and locked it. Then, in a whisper too calm for the weight of what he was about to reveal, he told her something that shattered the foundation of everything she believed. Daniel wasn't supposed to die. At least, not yet. James had been working for a subcontractor tied to Langford Biotech, the same corporation Sarah had been trying to investigate. He wasn't just a family friend, he was the one assigned to keep tabs on Daniel when he started digging too deep. Daniel, he claimed, had uncovered a covert government-backed program being funneled through Langford's Clinical Trials Division, an illegal off-the-books experiment targeting veterans suffering from PTSD. They were testing neural implant devices. Unapproved, experimental, and dangerously unregulated. Side effects included seizures, blackouts, and sudden psychological breakdowns. One of those veterans? Evan Mercer. But here was the twist that punched the air from her lungs. Daniel had willingly agreed to be a test subject too. According to James, Daniel wasn't just investigating Langford. He was in on it. At least at first. Recruited under the promise of helping soldiers like his brother, Daniel believed he could control the narrative from within. What he hadn't known was how deep the corruption ran. Once he discovered that the implants were causing long-term neural decay and that Langford had no intention of stopping the program, he turned whistleblower. He had compiled the evidence, encrypted it onto a black flash drive, and hidden it. But before he could go public, someone inside Langford made a move, one that ended with Daniel's car veering off the road and exploding into a ravine. Except now, Sarah wasn't even sure if that was the full truth. Was it an assassination? Or something worse? James then reached into his soaked jacket and handed her something she hadn't seen in years. Daniel's old burner phone. "He gave it to me the night before the crash," James whispered. "Said if anything happened to him, I'd know what to do." She stared at the phone, shaking. Why had James waited so long to come forward?
Why now?
Because someone else was watching James too. He'd only found the courage to run after his handler vanished without a trace, and all communication went dark. He didn't trust anyone anymore, not the government, not Langford, and not even the other test subjects, many of whom had started acting erratically or disappearing altogether. Evan Mercer, it turned out, hadn't been following Daniel. He'd been trying to warn him. Sarah powered on the burner phone with trembling fingers. There were only two things on it: a voice memo labeled for Sarah, and a set of GPS coordinates. The message was just 27 seconds long. Daniel's voice. Shaky. Tired. Urgent. "If you're hearing this, I'm already dead. I thought I could fix it from inside, but it's bigger than anything I imagined. They're watching us."
Not just me.
Everyone. Even James. Don't trust what you see. It's not just Langford. It's who's behind them. And just like that, the story twisted again. James, standing in front of her, wasn't the messenger. He was part of the trap. Daniel's warning hadn't been about the corporation. It was about the people closest to him. James flinched when he saw her expression shift. "Sarah, you have to believe me. I didn't know," but she was already backing away, one hand on her daughter's shoulder, the other sliding into her bag for the motel's spare keycard. Because in that moment, everything aligned. The SUV, the photograph, the threat, the missing flash drive. James hadn't come to protect her. He'd come to finish what Langford started. Now the stakes were no longer about justice. They were about survival. Sarah didn't sleep that night. After slipping out of the motel with her daughter, she drove 3 hours with her headlights off down desolate backroads, pausing at every stop sign to check the mirrors, convinced the dark SUV would reappear. Her daughter, Mia, finally stirred awake in the passenger seat, her voice hoarse and afraid, asking why they were running. Sarah had no answers she could safely share. She was trapped between two roles, mother and truth seeker, and every mile she drove deepened the split between them. The GPS coordinates on Daniel's burner phone pulsed on the screen like a heartbeat, and she followed them because it was the only thread left. But when they led her to an abandoned train depot buried in the Colorado hills, with no cell signal and no signs of life, she realized the truth Daniel left her wasn't just hidden. It was buried because someone had gone to great lengths to make sure no one would ever dig it up. Inside the depot, in a rusted locker beneath a false panel, she found a manila envelope wrapped in plastic. Photos, schematics, lab reports stamped confidential. All of it pointed to a program under the Department of Veterans Affairs, a partnership with Langford Biotech to trial cognitive enhancement through implants, masked as PTSD treatment. Sarah stared at the faces in the files. Dozens of veterans. But one photo turned her stomach to ice. A blurry image of Daniel, shaking hands with a man whose name she'd only heard once in hushed tones during her research, a defense contractor named Victor Halden. The same man who, according to documents, personally approved James as Daniel's handler. She wanted to scream, but there was no time. The moment she stepped outside, she felt the shift in the air. Too still, too quiet. That's when she saw the drone overhead. It wasn't military grade, but it was enough to tell her someone was watching. She ran back to the car, her daughter crying now, and Sarah's hands trembled so badly she almost dropped the keys. That night, They slept in the back seat of an abandoned truck in a scrapyard, camouflaged by broken glass and rust. And as Mia clutched her mother's arm and asked, "Is Daddy really gone?" Sarah finally broke. Because, for the first time, she wasn't sure. The way Daniel had said, "If you're hearing this, I'm already dead," wasn't just precaution. It was strategy. Like he had prepared for the possibility that he might disappear without a trace, that even Sarah would question the reality of his death. Was the body even his? The crash site had been closed off before she arrived, and she'd never been allowed to see the remains. What if it was staged? But the next morning, things spiraled beyond control. Sarah's sister, Emily, her only lifeline, the one who had agreed to quietly wire money to untraceable accounts, stopped responding. Calls went straight to voicemail. Then came the message, a single image sent from Emily's number. It was a photo of Mia at a playground. Yesterday's clothes. Yesterday's sky. Taken from a distance. Sarah dropped the phone, her breath catching as panic flooded her chest. This wasn't a threat. It was a command. Within the hour, she received the call. A voice masked through digital distortion offered her a deal. Walk away from the investigation and return home, and her daughter stays safe. Keep digging, and they'd erase every trace of her family, starting with Emily. Sarah asked, her voice raw, what they wanted from her. The reply was simple. We want what Daniel stole. We want the drive. But Sarah didn't have it. She had the envelope, but the physical drive? If Daniel had hidden it, he hadn't told her where. And now, she faced the unthinkable. To protect her daughter, she'd have to return to the very people responsible for destroying her husband. But if she gave in, she'd be helping bury the truth he died trying to reveal. The weight of that decision crushed her. She thought about leaving Mia with someone safe, someplace off-grid, and going after Halden herself.
But where?
With what? Every step forward risked more than her own life. Now, the cost was measured in blood. And then the worst possibility surfaced in her mind like a slow, sick wave. What if someone in her family had already made a deal? What if Emily's disappearance wasn't a threat, but a warning from inside? What if the betrayal wasn't just from James or Langford, but someone she loved? The questions clawed at her sanity as she stared at the burner phone, Daniel's message playing on loop in her head. Don't trust what you see. It's not just Langford. It's who's behind them. The program wasn't just about implants. It was about control, surveillance, compliance, erasure. And if Daniel had gone dark on purpose, if he had let her believe he died so she'd be safe, then every step she took now was undoing the one thing he died to protect. Still, Sarah wasn't sure she had a choice anymore. Not with Mia asleep in her lap and a drone still circling overhead. The only thing she knew for sure was this. Whatever came next wouldn't be a rescue. It would be a reckoning. Sarah's world shattered in layers. The betrayal didn't come with a gunshot or a scream. It came with a smile. It came from the one person she had blindly trusted through all of it, even more than her sister, even more than the memory of Daniel. When she finally made contact with James, Daniel's old military friend, the one who swore he had no ties to the program, the one who promised he'd protect her and Mia no matter what, he met her at a roadside diner on the Nevada-Arizona border, like nothing had changed. But Sarah had already learned to read between the lines. The way he glanced twice at his watch. The way he kept one hand under the table. And then he said it. They know where the drive is. They're offering you a way out. Take it.
He wasn't asking.
He was warning her. It hit her like cold steel through the ribs. James had been part of it from the beginning. Not just Langford. Not just the DOD. There was something deeper. Sarah's mind raced back to a document she'd almost dismissed in the depot envelope, an obscure reference to Project Oracle, buried beneath layers of redactions and security clearance blocks. It wasn't just cognitive implants. It was an AI-based behavioral prediction model. A system that didn't just monitor soldiers, it mapped their future decisions, predicted dissension, rebellion, even suicide. And if a subject's future posed a threat to military secrecy or public confidence, they were flagged for removal. Quietly.
Permanently.
Daniel had found out he was flagged. That's why he ran. That's why he tried to expose it. James leaned in, his voice lower now. You weren't supposed to dig this far, Sarah. He never meant for you to carry this weight. She could barely hear him, over the blood roaring in her ears. They're watching everything. The drone? Just a scare tactic. The real surveillance is under your skin. Sarah froze. She hadn't told anyone, about the strange rash at the base of her neck, the dull pain that flared every time she got near a cell tower or airport scanner. She'd chalked it up to stress, maybe paranoia. But now, with James sitting across from her looking like a man trapped in a cage he helped build, she knew. She had been marked.
Tracked.
Maybe even part of the system herself. What if Daniel had implanted a tracker in her before he disappeared, thinking it was the only way to protect her? What if she'd been the bait this entire time? She stood so quickly her chair fell backward. James didn't stop her. His eyes just pleaded with her like a man already condemned. They'll come for the girl next, he whispered. You know they will. You think it ends with you? Project Oracle needs a new subject now that Daniel's gone. She fits the profile. That broke something inside her. She didn't wait for the check. She ran. She stole a car off the lot, hot-wired it like Daniel had taught her years ago during their short-lived plan to get off the grid for fun. It wasn't fun now. It was survival. She drove for hours without stopping, Mia silent in the back seat with headphones on, unaware that her mother had just discovered she was the next experiment in a government-run prediction machine designed to preemptively eliminate threats to national security. The scale was beyond anything Sarah had imagined. It wasn't just Langford or Halden or even James. Project Oracle was funded through a tangled web of defense contracts, private investors, and university labs, all masked under mental health grants. Veterans, children with behavioral disorders, disenfranchised populations. All perfect test cases for predictive algorithms masked as care. All disposable. Sarah uncovered files that connected at least 3 suspicious deaths over the last year to preemptive containment. Suicides, accidents, overdoses. But they weren't accidents. They were executions by data, decisions made by a machine designed to predict when a person became a liability. And now she had a choice. Go dark for good, disappear with Mia to some forgotten corner of the map and pray they never found them, or go public. Risk everything. Risk her life, her daughter, her sanity. She found one journalist.
Just one.
A veteran herself, now working an independent YouTube news channel that specialized in government whistleblower stories. But even she was hesitant. The moment Sarah sent her a redacted copy of the Oracle blueprint, the journalist went off the grid. Sarah's phone rang minutes later. Unknown number. You're out of time. That was all it said. No voice. Just those 3 words in that same digital distortion. Her heart pounded as she threw the phone into a river and crushed the SIM in her teeth. The walls were closing in. The game was no longer about revealing the truth. It was about surviving it. As they crossed into Utah, Sarah realized she hadn't slept in 2 days, and her daughter's eyes had started to carry a haunted stillness. The kind of look Daniel had in the weeks before he vanished. The kind of look that said you already know what's coming, you're just waiting to see how hard it hits. But she wasn't backing down. Not now. Not when she knew the truth wasn't just inconvenient, it was catastrophic. Because what if Project Oracle wasn't just predicting dangerous people? What if it was programming them? What if Daniel hadn't gone rogue but had been pushed? And if that was true, how much of Sarah's life had ever really been her own? The rain fell in thick, diagonal sheets as Sarah stood beneath the corroded remnants of an old radar tower in the heart of an abandoned military testing facility deep in the Utah desert, an unmarked site that didn't show up on any GPS and wasn't acknowledged in any official record. This was where Daniel had once been stationed during his final deployment. She knew this because, buried in a corrupted folder she'd decrypted days ago, was a single satellite image with a timestamp and metadata that placed him there on the very day he vanished from the grid. She didn't expect to find anyone alive. What she found was far worse, an underground lab still pulsing with power, still warm, still occupied. The corridors reeked of antiseptic and rust. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like the hum of 1,000 lies being kept barely contained. She moved quietly, her heart hammering against her ribcage as if trying to warn her, "Run, run now." But there was no turning back. Not after Mia's name appeared in a logbook on a terminal just outside the main server room, listed as Candidate 219B, Oracle Child Variant. That was the moment Sarah's world imploded. Her daughter wasn't just a target. She was the next phase. The man waiting for her wasn't a shadowy assassin or a deranged scientist. It was Dr. Evan Hollis, the affable, soft-spoken cognitive behavioral researcher who had once counseled Daniel after his first breakdown. A man Sarah had spoken to over video calls. Trusted. Hollis smiled, as if they were old friends catching up. "I had a feeling you'd make it this far," he said, motioning to the chair opposite his desk, as if this were still an office, not a chamber of horrors. "You're far more predictable than your husband." Sarah didn't sit. Her fists clenched so tightly her nails dug into her palms, and every muscle in her body trembled with the fury of betrayal. She demanded answers about Daniel, about Project Oracle, about why her daughter had been drawn into something so monstrous. Hollis didn't flinch. He explained it all with a kind of arrogant serenity that made her blood boil. Project Oracle had started as a data initiative to help reduce PTSD in soldiers by predicting trauma responses. But as the machine learning model evolved, it began to detect more than stress. It identified what it called destabilizing potential. People likely to dissent, expose secrets, resist command structures. Daniel was the first anomaly. He didn't just question authority, he refused to be controlled. That made him a threat. When Daniel realized the program was expanding beyond soldiers into children with high cognitive potential like Mia, he tried to shut it down. But Oracle had already predicted that. He hadn't vanished. He had been reprogrammed, conditioned through neural loop therapy, drug cycles, and behavioral triggers. "We didn't kill your husband," Sarah, Hollis said. "We repurposed him." That was when she saw the movement in the shadows. A figure stepping out from behind the glass. His posture familiar. His eyes vacant. Her heart plummeted into her stomach. Daniel. He was alive, but not himself. His face bore the same features she remembered, but his gaze had the sterile coldness of a machine. The man she loved, the father of her child, had become Oracle's greatest weapon. "He volunteered, Sarah," Hollis said almost gently, "to protect you both. He just didn't know what he was agreeing to." Tears blurred her vision, but she held her ground as Daniel approached, silent, calculating. Her voice cracked as she called his name. No reaction, just a long pause. Then flicker. A tick in his left eye. A tremble in his hand. Somewhere in the depths of whatever programming they had buried him under, something was waking up. Sarah reached into her pocket and pulled out the last piece of evidence she had, the original voice recording Daniel left her, hidden in the old cassette player, back before any of this began. She played it. Static. Then his voice. "If you're hearing this, I failed. They took me. They'll say I volunteered, but I didn't. They lied." Daniel stopped. His breathing changed. Hollis rose from his chair, alarmed. "Turn that off," he commanded. But it was too late. The spell broke. Daniel blinked, looked at her, and said the one word she never thought she'd hear again. "Run." Then everything erupted. Lights exploded above. Sirens wailed. Hollis drew a gun and fired, grazing her shoulder as she ducked behind a cabinet. Daniel lunged at him, not as an agent of Oracle, but as a man reclaiming his soul. The two men crashed through the reinforced glass as the facility descended into chaos. Sarah fled, blood soaking her sleeve, heart shattered but pulsing with fire. She found Mia waiting in the truck, hidden just like she'd told her to. They sped off into the dark. But the twist, the one no one could have seen coming, didn't happen in that lab. It came 3 days later when Sarah uploaded everything to the cloud and released it to dozens of underground media outlets, YouTube channels, and whistleblower forums. Oracle's reach had been underestimated. Within hours, those posts were scrubbed. Accounts banned. Videos flagged for national security violations. Journalists vanished. But one file remained untouched. A corrupted video file with a single frame intact, a frame showing Mia, not as a subject, but as a designer. The logs didn't just say Candidate 219B. They said Prototype, Genetic Architect. Mia had never been the next phase of the experiment. She was the beginning. The dust had long since settled over the desert horizon, and for the first time in what felt like lifetimes, the wind carried no echoes of surveillance drones or the whine of high-frequency scanners. In the quiet that followed the storm, Sarah found herself standing on the porch of a secluded cabin nestled deep in the Rockies, far off the grid, surrounded by silence that felt almost alien. The final days had been a blur. After the collapse of the underground facility, a coordinated sweep wiped out most of the Oracle infrastructure, triggered not by a government agency, but by a decentralized group of digital activists who had been waiting for someone brave enough to expose it all. Her data dump had lit a match under a system so confident in its secrecy, it never considered the fire might come from within. But peace, Sarah quickly learned, didn't come with victory. It came with reckoning. Daniel's body was never recovered. Whether he died in the explosion, or whether Oracle had extracted him again before the collapse, remained unknown. She clung to the hope that he broke free in that final moment, not just from the programming, but from the place itself. And that somewhere, maybe, he was still fighting, still remembering. But it was Mia who bore the true weight of the ending. Sarah had spent so long trying to protect her, shield her from the truth, that she'd failed to see what her daughter had become. Mia hadn't been groomed to be a weapon or controlled as a subject. She had been instrumental in Oracle's early code, back when Daniel's mental health protocols were still in their infancy. A child prodigy unknowingly taught to solve emotional equations, her brain patterns had trained the core AI model without anyone realizing the long-term consequences. When Oracle expanded, her early input became the foundation for its logic tree, its decision-making structure. In essence, she hadn't just been part of the system. She was the system. Now, free of its control, Mia struggled with the implications. She couldn't escape the guilt of knowing that, in some twisted way, her mind helped build the same program that stole her father. But she also understood that what had been corrupted could also be reclaimed. Together, mother and daughter began the long process of rewriting, not just code, but memory, identity, trust. They built a new framework, not for AI, but for their lives. And in that cabin, with no cell service, no internet, no listening ears, Mia began to draw again. Not neural maps or predictive matrices, but trees, animals, places she'd never seen but imagined from books. For the first time, her thoughts belonged only to her. The world moved on quickly. News outlets never mentioned Oracle by name, spinning vague stories about a rogue cyber research group with ties to military contractors. Some channels hinted at government cover-ups, trending topics like AI conspiracy exposed and digital black sites dominating YouTube's homepage for a brief, electrified moment. But within days, the story vanished beneath algorithmic noise, celebrity gossip, political scandals, viral challenges. It was as if the truth had been too big to process, too dangerous to keep front and center. Only a few creators kept it alive: commentary channels, late-night deep divers, those who sift through the dark web and speak in code. For them, Sarah became a ghost story, a digital myth, the woman who brought Oracle to its knees and then vanished without a trace. But the last loose end came on a rainy evening, nearly a year after the explosion. A package arrived at the cabin. No return address. No markings. Inside, a small black USB drive wrapped in old military gauze. And a note, just one line, scribbled in a handwriting that stopped Sarah's breath cold. I remember now. It was Daniel's handwriting. She plugged it into a solar-powered laptop, heart pounding like it had on that first night back in the hallway, all those lifetimes ago. The screen flickered to life. A grainy video file played. Daniel, bruised but lucid, sat in front of a camera, eyes clear. He spoke of the facility, of the people behind it, of what he'd seen after breaking free. But more importantly, he spoke of Mia. She's not the end. She's the beginning. Not of what we feared, but of what we hoped AI could be. Not control. Not prediction. Understanding. The file ended with coordinates and a time, 5 years from now. No explanation.
Just that.
A promise. Maybe of reunion. Maybe of revelation. Or maybe, just maybe, a warning. Sarah closed the laptop and looked at her daughter sitting beside the fireplace, curled up with a book. She smiled through tears. The war wasn't over. But for now, they had won something rare, something precious.
Time.
Time to heal. Time to rebuild. Time to wait. And in the quiet after the storm, the final truth settled in. Not every conspiracy ends with a courtroom. Some end with a whisper in the dark, a heartbeat in the silence, and the knowledge that somewhere out there, the story isn't over. It's only just begun.